The Berlin Wall, 96 miles long, 11 feet high, for about 10,000 days or about 28 years. But exactly what was the Berlin Wall? The Berlin Wall, the conflict and compromise between capitalism and communism. The Berlin Wall was a border that separated people from each other because of the conflicts of their beliefs. However, when people work together and reach a compromise, we can tear down borders that once separated us for the greater good and the peace of many. After the Battle of Berlin during World War II, Allied forces encircled the city of Berlin. Knowing the end was near, Adolf Hitler, the Führer at the time, committed suicide, and his wife also committed suicide a day later. Germany was split into 4 parts, as well as Berlin, each part being owned by the 4 biggest Allied powers: the US, UK, France, and the Soviet Union. The only problem was that the Soviets were communist, which wasn't too popular in the western half of the world. The US, UK, and France all combined their forces and land to divide Berlin into 2 parts instead of 4. The parts were called West Berlin and East Berlin, the West being democratic, while the East was communist. The communists didn't want people moving over to West Berlin, so they tried to convince people to come over by insisting that communism was the solution to the Nazis' defeat and that capitalism was supporting Nazi regime and ideas. People still moved over to the democratic side because of higher salaries and a greater personal freedom. The US, UK, and France all invested money in West Berlin, while the Soviets took money from their people for war reparations. Over time, they built a wall called the Berlin Wall, or the Iron Curtain, to close our borders and stop people from leaving.
Once the Berlin Wall was constructed, the problem was not completely solved because the people had the ability to go from where the wall wasn't there. Most people decided to leave East Berlin. As a solution, the wall was expanded from homes to the train tracks to the outskirts. Along with that, there were fortifications to be made. Certain technologies from the army were also used. This was necessary as the people were against the wall and they attempted to tear it down. Even some guards decided to escape the east. One guard named Konrad Schumann became famous after deciding to flee to the west. Others tried climbing the wall, which was soon solved by steel spikes and touch-activated alarms. At certain places of the wall, tank traps were specifically designed for vehicles, and more guards were placed for additional security. Guards from the army and watchdogs were placed every 250 meters to monitor for anything that seemed suspicious. Each night, the wall was well lit by lamps so that the monitoring became much easier. Although there were many barriers for the people, they still found risky ways to bypass the guards. From the starting to the end of the wall, about 5,000 people have safely moved across the two. Having no other solution, in 1961, the soldiers were ordered to fire the escapers. By the time the soldiers were told not to fire the people anymore in 1989, at least 140 citizens were killed at the wall, and 8 soldiers died from people who wanted revenge. Sadly, about 250 innocent tourists died at checkpoints, along with many others who lived near the wall, dying from disease. Some people would also secretly look through cracks to meet people from the other side of the wall. On June 26, 1963, the 35th President of the United States of America, John F. Kennedy, gave his Ich bin ein Berliner speech.
There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. And there are some who say in Europe and elsewhere, we can work with the communists. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it's true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress. Lass sie nach Berlin kommen. Let them come.
On June 12, 1987, the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, gave his famous Address on East-West Relations speech. In that speech, he challenged the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down this wall and open up the barrier between West and East Berlin that has been there since 1961.
There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
After the speech, the reaction was pretty mixed. The East German authorities viewed the speech as absurd, while the general press in West Berlin was pretty quiet about the speech. Even before Reagan's arrival in Berlin, 50,000 people protested against it with riots and violence. 2 years later, a famous meeting at the Nikolai Church in Leipzig was made for a prayer on October 9, 1989. It was considered the meeting that led to the fall of the wall, because peace was prayed for by thousands of people who were tired of no freedom in their lives. These meetings were held every Monday, and people who had concerns with the East German government attended to voice their argument. This was the largest peace meeting in East Berlin at the time, and the East Germany Party was powerless to stop them. By the end of 1989, communism was beginning to end for East Europe. All across East Europe, communist governments were beginning to fall. On November 9, 1989, a political spokesman for the East Germany political party announced a change in relations with West Germany and subsequently West Berlin. The Berlin Wall was no longer needed to keep the East and West Berliners away from each other. At midnight on the same day, East Berliners were allowed to cross the checkpoints that led to West Berlin. People with pickaxes began to chip away at the wall while cranes and other machines began to tear apart the wall. On October 3, 1990, East Germany officially unified with West Germany, and East Berlin officially unified with West Berlin, even though the Berlin Wall was torn down a year earlier.
The indication that the wall was going to fall was when Gunter Schabowski said, "Permanent relocations can be done through all border checkpoints between the GDR into the FRG." The people, in shock, were thinking if the wall will really fall. As soon as the wall fell, the people celebrated for victory. Many held parties while others were on the move to meet their families and friends who haven't been seen for a few years. Crowds of people had watched the wall fall, and it was soon confirmed that Germany was a united country. Changes went as far as adopting the same currency. A famous remain of the original wall was left there to show the brutality and other casualties that had occurred when the wall was up and running. It is called Gedenkstätte Berliner Mauer.
The Berlin Wall was not only a physical boundary between West and East Berlin and West and East Germany, but it was also the symbolic boundary between the ideals of capitalism and communism. When the Berlin Wall fell, it was also the start of the fall of communism. All across Europe before and after the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union was losing its grip on those countries. The countries that has one been held by the ideals of communism were one by one starting to realize how bad communism economically was. So over time, after the Berlin Wall fell, the idea of communism was slowly starting to fade out. In the battle of capitalism versus communism, or the Cold War, the USA versus the Soviet Union had ended. All over the world, the dictatorships that were shown in the Soviet Union and other communist-controlled countries were starting to go away too, and democracy was starting to appear in the world more often.
The Berlin Wall represents a hurdle that was built because of the conflict of separate ideas. Society struggles when people have different views and opinions. Conflicts ensue and tension thickens. Weird ideas and opinions separate people from each other, and we build barriers and walls to keep it this way. However, we can learn to compromise our beliefs to achieve happiness for all. People from other places can get involved to try to get everybody to live a better life. When people have a common goal, they can work together and achieve great things. They can even tear down walls that once separated them from each other.